I want to say just two things as introduction. Firstly, for those of you who've been following the Wednesday webinars as a series, I wanted to let you know that next week we had been scheduled to have Paddy Loffman of Extinction Rebellion. Unfortunately, Paddy has a family health issue, which is going to take him away from us for at least next week. But the good news is that we have been very fortunate that Jeff Fromm, who's been a speaker at our Indie Summits before, is a world expert on marketing to millennials and to Gen Z, is going to give us a specially prepared webinar on how to market to Gen Z in the pandemic. So it's very relevant and also very interesting. And hopefully we'll be able to welcome Paddy back at a later date. But even more important, that are two more welcomes. Firstly, to all of you who've joined. And one of the most rewarding things about these is the ability to get so many people from so many different countries in the same room. So I can't welcome you all individually. There's too many of you. But I do welcome you by country. And I'd like to say that we have registered today people from Argentina, Australia, Bulgaria, Canada, Chile, China, Egypt, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, Ghana, Hong Kong, Hungary, India, Iran, Italy, Kenya, Lithuania, Mexico, Netherlands, Nigeria, North Macedonia, Pakistan, Philippines, Portugal, Puerto Rico, Russia, Singapore, Slovakia, Thailand, Turkey, Uruguay, UK, USA, and Vietnam. In alphabetical order, obviously. So please, you're all very welcome. Now I'd like to hand over to Stephanie, my colleague, to introduce our presenter for today, Rene Fischer. Stephanie, please take it away.
Hi, thank you so much for tuning into this week's webinar Wednesday. My name is Stephanie Fox from the Network One, as Julia mentioned, and I'm going to be moderating. So you've already Julian on this call, Paul Squirrel and Lizzie Gold are also on the call as well, and they're available if you need any help with anything. So just some housekeeping before I introduce our speaker. I'll post these in the chat box, but just to go through them quickly now, we're going to have a 5-minute introduction, then a 35-minute presentation from Rene, 15-minute Q&A, and we will finish by 1:55 BST, so you can be ready for your next appointment. Please do keep your microphones muted all the time. We're going to unmute your microphone if we're calling you to ask a question. But that being said, we would very much appreciate it if you keep your videos on so our speaker has some friendly faces to present to. There will be a Q&A portion at the end. If you have a question in the meantime while Rene's speaking, you can send them directly to me in the chat. So to do this, just go to your chat box, and where it says to, you should see a drop-down menu. So select Stephanie Fox, and afterwards we'll go through all of the questions and we'll select a few to ask Rene once he's finished speaking. So all set the questions should be sent to me directly, not to everyone in the chat. If you'd like to ask this question yourself, just type "I'll ask" at the end of the question. If you prefer for me to ask, that's totally fine. Just say so in the chat box as well. So you should hopefully have your Zoom viewing mode set to speaker view. If not, just click speaker view at the top right of your screen. Our speaker will be sharing slides on his screen. So if you can't see his speaker window when his slides are on, show active speaker video. If you have any technical issues, just message Lizzie Gold in the chat, as explained before, or you can email Lizzie at lizzie.gold@thenetworkone.com. We're going to be recording this webinar and we'll be sharing the slide afterwards, so there's no need to take notes if you prefer not to. And as Julian mentioned before, if the system does crash, just wait a couple of minutes and you can log back in via the same link that you used to log in this afternoon. Thank you very much. Now to introduce our speaker. Rene Fischer is partner and strategist at Synthesis Consulting in Lithuania. He has one of the most interesting CVs of any marketing and communications professional we've ever met. Excuse me. His early career was at Brainstore and TBWA in Switzerland. But finding this a little lacking in adventure, he emigrated to the Baltic states in 2001. Excuse me. He held creative director positions at some of the most dynamic independent agencies in Latvia and Estonia, where he founded the country's first art directors club. Realizing that emerging markets needed expertise in strategy as well as creativity, he switched his focus to become a strategy director at agencies in Lithuania and Ukraine. Rene then went on to start agencies in Uzbekistan and Iran before returning to Vilnius to co-found Synthesis Consulting. Synthesis is a group of hyper-specialized companies that support organizations going through a strategic transformation process and entrepreneurs breaking away to form new ventures, actualizing potential in products, services, brands, creation, sales, communications, and organizational design through simple, practical insights and processes. Rene claims to speak 5 languages fluently: English, French, German, Russian, and Estonian, but we expect he's being unduly modest. In this session, Rene will look at how startups are different from the typical agency client and what you will need to do to win their business. Even if startups aren't yet on your agenda, many of the skills and thinking we'll explore today can be used to impress traditional clients too. Without further ado, I will pass over to Rene.
Hi, everybody. Big pleasure to be here. I've been here the last couple of weeks as well, so I think I've already seen quite some of the faces, and it's been some really interesting webinars. So let me try to not disappoint you today. As Stephanie said, we are a consultancy, and as such, we work with various sectors from large classical corporates to state-run companies, governments, but also a large amount of startups. And this takes place across currently about 3 continents, though we have a couple of emerging clients in Asia. And what we have noticed over time when working with all these companies is that they often complain to us about the communications agencies they work with. So we have kind of an insight in where certain things go wrong. That's not necessarily to say that it's the agencies that make all the mistakes, of course. It's more like a mismatch of expectations and of work styles. So this is what I'm gonna talk about today. I will share slides from now on. So in case you don't see my slides, please make some really awkward hand gestures so I know. I guess you see my screen now. So one thing we notice from cooperation partners, but also from the other side, from clients, is that there's quite an amount of communications agencies that really want to work with startups and want to work even with, let's say, not the super early stage startups that have absolutely no money, but companies that already have some tractions, could potentially pay a bill or two. And I mean, this is a growing market, it's a growing segment, but what we also notice is that the whole work model of classic communication agencies is really built around and customized for the need of corporate clients. So there is already quite a mismatch in work styles, in how these companies work. And that's not even it's not even only relevant when we talk about startups, because what startups also do besides their own business is they influence the business culture outside. I mean, startups shape how companies operate, how company culture is reshaping in the world, how company behavior, company expectations are changing. So even if an agency is not necessarily into the idea of, yeah, let's start working with a bunch of startups now, the learnings you can take from working with startups have an increasing relevance to working with traditional clients as well. But there's a couple of areas where we see and we hear agencies really fail to impress, in particular startups. The 4 main areas are basically transparency, partnership, authority, and usability. I'll go through each of them to shed a light on what they mean. In terms of transparency, what we hear quite often is that the way agencies work is very familiar, of course, to a marketing department that has been working with agencies for perhaps decades, but it's really hard to understand, and even at times illogical for people who come from outside the industry. And especially for startups, it's really almost counterintuitive. What I mean with this is that even as a creative industry that we are as agencies, there tend to be some surprisingly bureaucratic and surprisingly rigid processes that are really like, this is the way it has to be, and there is no way to edit that because we've done it like this forever. A complaint we hear frequently as well is the whole, what's something that seems normal for agencies, but really ends up coming across as black boxing, kind of the, well, you gave us a briefing, now we just go, disappear for a couple of weeks, and then we come back out of nowhere with a couple of proposals. So what is happening in between? What is actually going on? That remains totally in the hiding. The roles inside agencies are, of course, important inside agencies, but they are also really, really hard to understand for clients not familiar to the industry and clients not used to working with agencies. Like, I mean, what's the difference between an art director and a creative director? I mean, outside the industry, I bet there's not a lot of people who could actually tell. And that, of course, all leads to this nagging doubt that people have in their minds. Is like, what am I actually paying for? I'm getting something, and the result may be fantastic, but it's a really, from a process viewpoint, it's pretty vague and pretty confusing what's actually going on in this black box kitchen of agencies. So a few things that we learned will really help when working with startups is, for example, starting with more on-site work, like really sending a team to the client's office, meeting not only the key decision makers, but meeting the team, sitting there day in, day out, sharing the water cooler conversations, really understanding what is going on there. What is this company about? What does this startup do? What are the parameters at play? Who are the people? Co-creation, as much as when I used to be a creative director, I would have hated that, but co-creation really works, like basically more iterative processes involving the client, even in creative stages, breaking it all down into smaller chunks, doing a little bit, pre-selling ideas, then taking that further, and maybe even involving people from the client's office into the creative stages. Avoiding jargon helps as well. I mean, instead of hiding behind all our industry wording that often remains lost in translation, trying to break it down to human words, human language. What are we really doing? What is this all about? So these are a few of the things that help building a little bit more of this collaborative spirit. It goes further into partnerships where agencies are essentially designed to limit client interaction with very good reasons to certain touch points. And then, I mean, at the end, you just end up sending out an invoice. For startups, this is really a difficult thing to deal with, because at the end, they would definitely prefer something of a long-term partnership, people with whom to work together, and ideally, in an ideal world, even people who share a certain passion for this product, for this service, who agree that, yeah, this is a mission worth undertaking, and we are with you, and we will do our best to support you in it. The lack of partnerships when working with agencies can show in things like like the fact that we tend to only show up for presentations. I mean, there's basically silence in the house, and then now we are ready to schedule a presentation for next Thursday. The perfection pressure that basically we try to come back with ready-made proposals, which again, there are very good reasons for that, but basically not really interacting much with the client until there is something that we have to show that is presentation ready. One sensitive thing we hear complaints about as well is when different partners, different stakeholders be it PR agencies and advertising agencies, be it media and digital agencies, be it even extra parties like a social media company or a specialist in SEO, when they start openly competing with each other in the process. Like, yeah, everybody wants to get some hands on the other party's budgets. That's natural. But nobody seems to play a very constructive role in this game. And as creative agency, you end up most likely on the losing end, because there is really, we are probably the party that has the least tangible, rationalizable output. It also goes into the payment methods of like saying, okay, we have hourly fees, we have project fees, we have maybe monthly agreements. That's all fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but it doesn't exactly express an attitude of co-ownership and of being a part of this mission. So a few things that could be done about this are more process checkpoints, like instead of just getting back with a final presentation, going in with unready thoughts, discussing things, again, sitting with the team, maybe not only with the key decision takers, but with entire teams. Embracing an approach of mutual learning of, I mean, who of all these different stakeholders can we teach something, but who do we have things to learn from? What can we test? What should we test? What could we even test together? But then I also think agencies are theoretically in a prime position to be the spider in the web, the coordination party, rather than a competing party, the party that can really make most sense of how all these different disciplines involved, be it PR, media, digital, social, etc., how they work together. The creative agency tends to have the widest viewpoint here and the most potentially experience in cross-disciplinary work. And of course, the touchy subject of partnership deals, like, is there any way for alternative remuneration models? Is there a way to do an equity deal, to maybe do options, to do delivery-based, KPI-based payment, like success fees or things like these that would maybe mathematically even work out very similarly, but that would underline this attitude of we are in this together and we are actively partaking in the business. We're not just delivering a couple of campaigns and then, sorry guys, we're out of here. Authority is the third aspect that especially startups are definitely looking for, and agencies are theoretically in a prime position for that, because agencies are one of the few partners you get that has experience across a large number of industries, that has experience across all sorts of disciplines, has routinely worked with very many different partners, very many different service providers, and really has the vastest, biggest insight into all these different disciplines at play. However, most of the time, it looks and feels as if agencies just walk in selling an interchangeable product. While what startups would really be looking for is exactly this outside experienced advice from somebody who has seen countless industries, categories, and who has been around the block and really learned things that can be shared. So how this shows in the agency startup relationship is, for instance, the good old which one do you like? I mean, the classic agency habit of walking in with 3 concepts, which ultimately comes across as, yeah, we also don't really know, so hey guys, why don't you just choose the one you like best? The defensive argumentation, which is not necessarily meant to be defensive, but in the conversation about a creative concept, it more often than not runs into this. It's the agency finds itself in a defensive position, forced to argue why this idea or this concept is good. And I think once you are in a position of having to defend something, you already basically lost. at least you lost the air of authority and the air of expertise. Surprisingly often, and we hear that from plenty of clients, it's the business and purpose blindness. On the one hand, maybe a lack of information about the actual category, like what are the parameters at play, what is going on here, where is money made, where is money lost, what's going on in the background, what are the logistics like. So all these business parameters that are too often ignored, sometimes even the purposes that can be ignored, because especially when working with startups, the purpose is not necessarily to sell a product. The purpose can simply be to raise the value of the company in order to sell it later. The purpose can be to raise investment. So that changes the role of the agency and the value the agency can bring to the table. And classic little lost in translation elements. We have this good old heuristic that I'm sure most of you have been there. I have certainly been there. That when you walk into an agency, the first thing you see is a shelf of obscurely shaped statues and often slightly phallic things that are gold coated and stand on a shelf. I mean, all these awards may be a relevant heuristic for some clients, but for certain clients, they just mean nothing. It's a completely meaningless display of pride that doesn't translate into any customer value. So generally, I mean, we absolutely prefer to say, what's the point going into a presentation or a meeting with a startup client showing options? There's no need for options. I mean, these people brought us on board in order to give them advice. So it stands to reason that what they expect from us is that one option, that one, whatever, one brand, one logo, one campaign, that is simply the right one for their case. It's our job to define and understand what is the right one. Of course, in order to do that, we need solid criteria that are aligned with the client and that are developed in a decent strategy stage that is perhaps a little more complex than putting together a creative brief. What we also need for that is perhaps a longer learning stage in which we really spend time with the people, spend time with the top management, spend time with the production people, the salespeople, learning what the category is all about, learning what this brand, what this product is all about. And when it comes to what to replace the pride of awards with, I think there's a much bigger prize to be gained from working with startups, really, which is like most agencies at some point or another come to points where they realize that, yeah, the client gave us a communication brief, that's all fine, we can make campaigns out of that, but the problem the client has is not a communication problem. It's a product problem, it's a positioning problem, whatever it may be. And one of the beautiful things about agencies, once they work on a really trusted and expert level with a startup, is that you can actually influence the product. I mean, the doors are all open. This is probably in flux anyway. The positioning is to be debated. Even the product can be changed. The service can be adjusted. Pricing models are absolutely flexible. So this is a place where an agency can make itself really, really important as a partner, which with classical clients tends to be a little bit harder. Usability is the fourth major complaint area, where very often what agencies deliver to a client still bases on department use cases. In other words, it's designed to be useful for a marketing department which owns the brand and owns communication, even though reality is really not quite like that anymore. And startups in particular navigate an ecosystem of specialist partners, of anything from affiliate marketers to CRO support to influencers. And for all of these, alignment is the most critical. Alignment and onboarding, they need to receive not so much guidelines. What they need to receive is clarity. What is this about? So in classical agency operation, there is often a delivered and forgotten moment. I mean, yeah, we delivered the campaign, we delivered the TVC, we delivered whatever it is we deliver, and then we're out of here, which makes sense, of course, because of the remuneration models. It's not exactly what a startup is looking for, though. Then this is a bit of an anachronism, in my opinion, but we still see that at least half of the agency partners we work with, they still deliver brand books as if it was 1995. I mean, as if we lived in a print and television driven world, and we have basically a marketing department that owns and controls all of that, and that just passes on instructions. But that's really not how the world works anymore. And for startups, it very much isn't. Then we have an element of jumping from campaign to campaign and of trying to align everybody with the use of guidelines and of implementation rules. Now, in working with startups, some of these things are rather easy to change. A support in implementation is important not so much on a production side, but on a side of what happens with all of this later, because it's going to stay alive. I mean, the social media activity will continue. So what can the agency do to still be there, to guide, to support these different fragmented teams in their day-to-day jobs? Brand books can definitely evolve into something that's much more of a purpose guidance and a brand guidance. Like what are the elements that would be necessary to really coordinate all these different teams that are probably even in different countries, that need to work with affiliates, that need to work with social media, that need to work with traditional advertising, that need to work with PR. So a classical brand book is not exactly going to do that. Testing and adapting, this flexibility to jump back, try different options, bring them out there, A/B testing or any other form of testing. What can an agency do to be ready for that and to even embrace it instead of seeing it with suspicion? And what can an agency do to onboard the internal team? Like how to raise this passion in the client to take over and to guide and steer this themselves. So these four run down into something actually rather simple at the end of the day. What, especially for startups, what an agency really needs to become is a partner, a consultant, and an enabler. Some agencies are. I mean, I'm not saying that this is a problem for every single agency out there. Obviously, agencies are experienced and have had situations where they have adapted. Many agencies are pushing the boundaries of how the industry works. But by and large, many startups do not receive from a communications agency what they need from a communications agency. And that is, at the end, a partner, a consultant, and an enabler. So if to put this into a trial run, if anyone hasn't yet experimented with different working models inside the company, how could you set this up for a relatively risk-free, not too daring, experimenting trial run? It's essentially 5 steps. In a very simple model, there definitely are different parameters that apply for different agencies in different markets with different priorities. But one simple framework would be starting with a client selection and onboarding. So selecting a client for this, a startup client for this, which would ideally be something low risk and high passion, meaning it's probably a startup whose product we stand behind, whose product we admire, who do something we'd anyway love to support, that we maybe use ourselves, that we want ourselves. So it's easier to develop the necessary internal passion to say, hey, let's do this. building the relationship with this client to the point of really understanding the needs and the pain points. So not just like the direct business of the agency, but also what's beyond that. What are really their problems? What can we help with? And if there are areas we cannot help with, how can we still enable them to deal with it better? And finding a financial model, might be an equity deal, might be any other form of pay, but it is most probably not a hourly based, end of the month invoice based system. The second step that is extremely important is the internal alignment, like inside the agency, because naturally it's possible if this is poorly communicated, you easily run into a situation where the team that deals with this startup experiment becomes almost like an internal competition to the teams that need to continue working with classical clients. So clarifying the purpose of this experiment, what do we actually want from that? What is the goal here? Why are we setting up this little experimental playground? Building the internal support, which usually requires a lot of one-on-one conversations, getting people behind this and making everybody really understand what's the purpose here. Not locking people out as well, because if there is, for example, one designated team that has the freedom to reinvent the way the agency works for this particular client, where are the others? Are there points of co-development? Are there touch points where, for example, the rest of the creative department is involved in a certain stage? So how do we turn the rest of the agency into stakeholders here as well? A third stage is the setup of the actual team and the setup of the KPIs. Now, for the actual team, it definitely makes sense if it's a hybrid of seasoned, experienced people who have been here for 10 years and have seen it all, together with junior people who are not yet as spoiled by habit as the more senior of us tend to be. It's probably healthy in most cases to make it a mix of new and current employees, like designating a few people from the current team to this, but adding some external forces. Important is that it's all people who are eager and able to reinvent, to basically say, hey, this is the way we've always done it, but does it have to be this way? What could we change? What could we play around with? And most importantly, the KPIs need to be set in such a way that it's not only about the classical success criteria, because they would eradicate the readiness to take risks and to experiment. So it must be very clear that one of the KPIs here is learning. And if one of the KPIs is learning, it automatically means that the team must be empowered to try things out, even if they are maybe not working out financially immediately, even if they might be a waste of resources, even if it might go completely wrong. But as long as the relationship and coordination with the client is there, the team must have the absolute freedom and the KPI to invent new ways of working, new ways of delivering, new ways of coordinating with the client, and open the doors for learning. The learnings need to be analyzed as well, needs, of course, clear criteria, needs very open discussions, needs a very honest assessment of things we did that worked well, things we did that really didn't work at all. And it needs this filter of identifying, okay, which of these things we tried out only works really for this particular startup client, and which of these things could we potentially adapt for other clients? Which could we just take over and say, hey, let's try this little thing with an existing normal client, whatever normal means. And then the agency application, once we have identified a couple of things that could be taken over and that could be rolled out agency-wide, they need, of course, they need to fulfill certain criteria. I mean, we probably want to start with something simple, something that doesn't change the whole process around. Something like, for example, a different brand book delivery format, or something like a different creative integration of the client model. Whichever it is, it probably needs to be client validated. So I mean, it definitely stands to talk with a couple of the existing clients about what they struggle with, where we underdeliver, what they have always secretly been hoping to receive but never received, things where they find it difficult to deal with us. And so we can prioritize little things that we can feed back into the core agency. Market relevance, of course, differs a lot as well. That's especially here, I mean, with basically an audience here of people from probably, I don't remember Julian's full list, but probably 30, 40, 50 countries. The situation is very different in different markets. The needs are different. So that needs to be adapted. And there's the additional value of case study and PR value. I mean, like ideally, these little first innovations that can be taken from learning, from working with a startup. These little first innovations can make a little differentiating factor in pitching future clients, even non-startups, and in giving the agency let's say a unique methodology, a unique angle on how they work, which again translates back into website talking points, industry media, and pitch presentations. So that's one possible framework of 5 simple steps how to create this trial space. And what it really is a space for controlled experimentation with limited risk, limited expense, focus on innovation KPIs, ensuring the team is on board, and ensuring from the beginning that there is a path for these little innovations back into the core agency, so they actually can be shaping the way we work or we deliver our work to completely regular clients. So this is it from my side. It's essentially the main takeout is that there are simple steps to create an experimenting ground to just try this. It's absolutely ideal to try it with a startup because that is where the pain point of a client working with a traditional agency is the biggest. And it is very interesting to talk about this in the context of a group of independent agencies, because from all we've seen and all the people we worked with, there is definitely one major takeout, which is if anyone is innovating the agency business, it's going to be the independent agencies. It's not going to be the good old dinosaurs.
Great, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. We're now going to open up the floor for questions, if that's fine with you. A few have been coming through to me. I know that Khushbu Vasa has a couple of questions, if you're there, Khushbu.
Yes, I'm here.
Hi.
Hi. Hi, Rene. This is Khushbu, and I work with an agency called Chlorophyll, which is based in Mumbai. So my question is that we've actually started thinking of working with startups because we've got a lot of inquiries from them. But where it actually, oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you, but it's very quiet. So if you could just speak a tiny bit louder.
Okay. So my question is that, from the past 2 years, we have been getting inquiries, but where it actually falls off is the time and the cost. Because usually the startups come up saying that, I need a brand name in a week, which is actually not possible. So how do we tackle that? And the other question is, there were 2 questions. That was the first. The second question is, how do you see this post-COVID scenario? How do you see it playing for startups? And hence, how does it affect us as agencies?
These are some very good questions that admittedly we have faced as well at numerous points. The first one, that is. Second one is pretty new. In terms of speed, I think it's very much a question of how the whole process is set up. For example, we do naming as well, and it has never been a problem for us to deliver within 1 week. But this is probably exactly a process question, because it's not a very large process of coming up with a brief and then going through multiple iterations of creative. In such urgent cases, we use could say a simplified process where we just have a designated amount of people who pool their resources together in one or multiple sprints, and then it's getting fine-tuned and sorted out over the course of a couple of days. So I think that's really the only way to work with such organizations. I mean, startups will always have certain needs in terms of speed, be it naming, and perhaps even more so when it's about communication, where, I mean, the startup is not going to wait for 2 weeks until we come back with a campaign proposal. They have something that needs to go out now. So I think that's why this experimentation team would really seem to be the right approach, like some team that has the freedom to act and work however they want, absolutely unconstrained by how the rest of the agency works. And that's not a perfect science. I mean, this can fail as well, but then at least you know where it fails and why it fails, and can take it from there.
Thank you, Rene.
When it's about the post-COVID aspect, I think that's from what we see, the post-COVID aspect is most interesting, because what it really did is it accelerated processes that were already there. I mean, it has made companies leaner, faster. It has cleaned up decision processes. It has made half the world remote workers. So essentially all these things were there before. And as you see, they are all perhaps rather associated with startup culture and startup business styles than they are with the classic corporation model. So I would say the biggest effect of COVID-19 is that it has accelerated the speed with which classical companies become more like startups. And if that is so, then the entire question of how can communications agencies better work with startups, to us, has just become way more relevant, because now companies are turning into startups, at least to a certain extent.
Great, thank you so much. We have another question now from Henry Feintuch, if you're available, Henry. Henry, are you about?
Okay, all good.
Hi.
So Rene, first of all, it's funny, you're in Lithuania, I'm in New York. Slightly different size markets, but so much of what you said resonates with my experience. Been doing startups for a couple of decades now, and I think it all comes down to empathy. You need to think of it from the client perspective, not from the agency perspective. And the fact that a CEO from another country operating in your country wants to plan an event for a legal holiday, that's not PR, that's common business sense. And that's the kind of extra value that we all need to think about from the client perspective. Yeah, there's a scope of work and there's the traditional tactics, but if you're going to succeed and grow a startup kind of a relationship, you really have to partner with them and think like a startup. So more a comment than a question. Spot on. I think you've done a great job of taking this weird world of startups and kind of quantifying it and bracketing it, and great presentation.
Thanks a lot, appreciate it. And I think you're absolutely right. It's at the end of the day, it's just down to empathy and and understanding what somebody really needs. We tend to, and I mean, guilty as charged, I have been in the advertising business for 2 decades. We've always been a bit of a self-referential industry, and we've always had a bit of an attitude of this is how we do it and you better just swallow it. And that just doesn't work when you end up facing clients with fundamentally different operational principles.
Thank you. We've got another question from our audience, and they've said, startups need to impress customers and also investors. Can one agency help with both tasks, and are they quite different? How different are they?
I think that's almost in the territory of quoting Henry, because I wouldn't say it's a different task. It's a communications task at the end of the day. And it's about understanding the purpose of what we're doing. If you want to impress clients, you of course have certain parameters there. I mean, you have a brand to communicate, you have a value proposition to communicate. Maybe you communicate a bigger vision for how you think the world should be. If you want to impress investors, you simply have different parameters. I mean, you need to bring the information about this company into a format that is relevant for the investors. So it's simply about understanding the target audience. I think this is structurally, it's no different from how agencies, perhaps in some places, distinct between we do an image campaign or we do a sales campaign. It's simply a different mechanic and a different purpose, but it's not so different from the viewpoint of how do we build a communication strategy, how do we build a result.
Thank you very much for that. We've got another question. They've said, given that startups are different, if agencies are considering working with them, should agencies establish special startup departments to handle them well?
I think it depends on how big you are and what you really want to get out of this. Let's say if you see during an experimentation stage that you really struggle to combine the two worlds internally, that it creates frictions within the team, or that it creates two teams that are acting so different that it's hard to still have them under one roof, then I'd say, why not? Why not to just create a separate agency brand that specializes in this? Publicly, to communicate the agency, this specialization value might even be helpful, because it is definitely true that if you can walk up to a startup client and say, hey, we have created all our internal processes, our delivery formats, the way we work with clients, we have created them all specifically for working with startups, that's a big advantage.
Great.
I do, however, find it important that these learnings don't remain in the silo of a department or an agency that works for startups specifically, because there is a lot of learning there that should be fed back to the core business, and that can help to innovate the way the agency works with traditional clients too. Because the world is changing, and it's not only changing on the obvious level of startups are different. It's also corporations in 10 years are entirely different companies from right now.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much. I think that's all of the time we have for questions now. I'm just going to share your details again on my screen in case anyone has any more questions that they would like to ask. You can contact Rene directly. As you can see on the screen, his email address is rene@synthesis.consulting, or you can find him on LinkedIn. So it's linkedin.com/Fischer Rene. Or the website is synthesis.consulting. We'd like to give a really big thank you to Rene for that great webinar. And thank you all for coming. We hope you enjoyed it. We will continue to hold webinars at the same time every Wednesday. The next one will be held on the 27th of May at the same time. So that's 1 p.m. in London. Next week, we'll be joined by guest speaker Jeff Fromm, who stepped in instead of Paddy Lochman. As Julia mentioned, he couldn't make it. But Jeff will be giving a really interesting talk about marketing to Gen Z and driving brand love in the age of sustainability. So Jeff Fromm is a partner at Barclay, a weekly contributor at Forbes, and he's the author of 4 books, including The Purpose Advantage, Marketing to Millennials, Millennials with Kids, and Marketing to Gen Z. He published the first public research study of millennials as consumers with the Boston Consulting Group in 2010 and 2011. He's traveled the world sharing insights on consumer trends, youth culture, as well as purpose and sustainability. In this pivotal presentation, Jeff Fromm will use his world-renowned consumer expertise to provide you with data-driven insights that drive results. So sign up for this webinar. Just go to www.thenetwork1.com/webinars. You can find our whole list of webinars there. There are others you can sign up for as well. So we hope to see you at another webinar again soon. Big thanks to Rene again. Thanks to all of you for joining, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Bye.